Well, one question many voters are wondering, what happens to all those election funds now that Joe Biden has dropped out of the race? To help break it down for us, I want to bring in Brad Smith. He's a former chairman of the U.S. Federal Election Commission and an expert in campaign finance law. And he joins us from Galena, Ohio. Brad, thanks so much for jumping on with us this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So I want to begin with this idea that so many Democratic donors have given money to this campaign when Biden was at the top of that ticket. If Harris becomes the Democratic nominee, will she be able to access that funding for the campaign?
Well, it's a complicated question. It's about $95 million, almost $96 million as of the campaign report that was filed on Saturday by the campaign. And the answer is a little bit murky. Now, the Democrats have already made their decision. That is, they've renamed the committee from Biden for president to Harris for president. I presume that they've spent some money in the last 24 hours. So they've made their choice. They're saying Harris can spend the money. And their theory goes like this. In the United States, each candidate has to have an authorized committee. An authorized committee can only represent one candidate. But there is an exception for that. The vice president's authorized committee is always considered to be the president's authorized committee. So the Democrats are saying is, look, since the summer of 2020, Kamala Harris was the vice presidential nominee, and her name went on to that committee. And so she has authority now to take over all the money that Biden has dropped out. The Republicans are going to be saying, no, not so fast. What they're going to say is, look, Harris right now has no official status, at least until maybe yesterday when she became a candidate for president. She was not the party's nominee for vice president. She had been in 2020, but she's not now. She is just the sitting vice president. Conceivably, at their convention, they could have swapped her out, put somebody else in, either because Biden wanted to or because the delegates revolted. So the Republicans are going to say she's not entitled to any of that money. She's not the nominee of the party, and therefore she is not on that account after the election of 2020. That's the arguments that the two sides will make. Now, the reality of how it's going to go down is like this. The Democrats, like I say, have already made their choice. They're spending the money. They've renamed it the Harris Committee. The Republicans or some Republican allied group, will, maybe the Trump campaign even, somebody will file a complaint and it will go to the U.S. Federal Election Commission. Under the statutory deadlines under which the statutory procedures under which that Federal Election Commission works, right, it takes them a minimum of 60 days to do anything. And that's if they move from one phase to another seamlessly with no staff time. That's just set up in the statute. They have to allow certain amounts of time for people to respond and so on. So if you think about it, this means nothing is really going to happen until sometime in October. And at that point, what the FEC would be doing would be bringing a lawsuit in federal court to enforce the law. And as a practical matter, most U.S. judges are going to be very reluctant to step in and issue a preliminary injunction at that point in time, just weeks before the election, telling one party you've been violating the law and you can't spend that $90 million. Unless the law is absolutely clear, I don't think they're going to do that.
So if if a complaint is filed, that doesn't mean that they have to stop spending or, freeze what they're doing?
Right. You don't, and you wouldn't want that because that means people just be filing complaints to try to freeze the other side all the time. So I think in the end, what's going to happen is I think the Republicans probably have a little bit better of the statutory argument, but the Democratic position is by no means implausible. And for that reason, I can't imagine a court would issue an injunction. And then the other issue is that the commission has 3 Republicans on it and 3 Democrats. When the law is clear, they go ahead and enforce the law. It's not a big deal. But when the law is not clear, as in this, when there's a plausible argument on the other side, I think you're very likely to see a partisan breakdown, 3-3, no majority on the commission. And for that reason, the commission is unlikely to pursue this action. So I think that's the practical reality of how it happens.
Oh, it's so interesting, Brad. I have a couple of other questions for you here, so maybe we can run through them. What if someone other than Harris becomes the nominee?
Great question. And that's exactly the next question. In that case, it's actually clearer what the Democrats could do. And by the way, they could do this with Harris, too. But again, they've chosen not to. is they can't transfer the money over to that other candidate's campaign, but they can give it to the Democratic National Committee. Now, the Democratic National Committee, under our convoluted laws, would have to use this for what are called independent expenditures. Each party has an independent expenditure unit. And what does that mean? It means they're not allowed to talk to the candidates. They can't share polling data with them. The candidate can't say, we need help in this state or that state. They can't talk about targeted messaging. The party just has to do it on its own. So it's never quite as effective as if the candidate had the money, right? Because you lose some synthesis and in the the two different arms, and they might be going off in different directions. The other thing the Democrats would lose if they do that is that candidates in the United States are entitled to what's called the lowest unit rate on broadcast ads, but political parties are not. So they'd have to pay more for broadcast ads. And close to an election, that can actually be pretty significant. Sometimes you're purchasing spot ads on a short-term basis. So the independent spending will not be as efficient as if the candidate had the money herself or himself, but they will be able to spend the money to support their candidate in some way.
Okay. Brad, you are a wealth of knowledge on the money behind campaigning here. We have to leave it there, but thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
That's Brad Smith. He's a former chairman of the U.S. Federal Election Commission.